Hey guys, Greg here. Wanted to cover a topic that really has been overlooked in Mueller in his testimony in front of Congress. But more importantly than the testimony in front of Congress, this point here goes to the very heart of the entire Mueller report. I'll get to that, why I say that later on. For now, I want to talk about this one specific issue and be very verbose about it. So, Mueller, on, I believe it was May 29th of 2019, did this sudden press conference. And everybody thought something amazing was going to come out of it. And the big news that came out of it was he's resigning, going into private life. Special counsel's office is closed. Talked about the two sections of the Mueller report. But really, none of that was news. But news media jumps all over that to come up with their own narrative, just like they did with the Mueller report itself. We're going to get into that later on, a little bit later on the end of this video. But they try to okay, what's the purpose? What's he trying to say? What was the point? And it was really, he was made fun of really bad by Republicans or right-wingers. That was just a bumbling mess. Did he even write that himself? And up until he testified in front of the House, it was really unclear what was going on with him. But it was obvious after he testified in front of the House that he really shouldn't be working in any high-level position. As a private lawyer, or somebody who knows the judges to get things done, yes. But as a high-level government official that he was working at, currently, right before he resigned, didn't belong there. That became obvious. Anyway, on to the statement here. So, I'm going to read to you what I believe is the most important part of it, and it comes right at the beginning of his statements, right at the beginning towards the very beginning of his entire statement, and then I believe it became at the beginning for a reason, and I believe that reason is because this statement, this long, verbose statement, was made to satisfy only one person. Only one specific person, a woman. One specific woman, this statement was meant to satisfy. And the rest of it was just nonsense for the news media to just wonder what his point was. Which is not uncommon for him. He likes to be confusing, and he likes to put things in writing and be intentionally vague or misleading about them. But anyway, let's go into his exact statement that he said. I'm going to pause several times during the statement to give some context into it. This is him speaking. I'll make a few remarks about the results of our work, but beyond these remarks, it's important that the office's written work speak for itself. All right. What does that mean? Let's read that again. I'll make a few remarks about the results of our work, but beyond these few remarks, it's important that the office's written work speak for itself. So you could be against Trump, whatever, okay, and read in any little section of the Mueller report and say, oh, Trump's guilty because he couldn't, because they have a policy that we can't indict a sitting president, blah, 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 therefore he's guilty. It's why. Now, if you're going to read that far into it, read into this too. Read it one more time. I'll make a few remarks about the results of our work. But beyond these few remarks, it's important that the officer's written work speak for itself. Translation, what does that mean? I'm going to say a couple things. But beyond this, what I wrote stands. In other words, I'm correcting my Mueller report right here. The whole point of, and I'm going to get to why I make this statement, and I didn't discover this. This is, Dan Bongino covered this. He was covering it on another news source that covered it in greater detail, that broke the story. I'm amazed this isn't bigger news. He's saying, beyond these few remarks, it's important that the officer's written work speak for itself. He could reword that to say, I'm correcting my report. This is a correction to my report. But he doesn't speak clearly. He's not what news media like to call, or managers like to call, transparent. He's not transparent at all. He's intentionally vague. So rather than say I'm correcting my work, he's saying beyond these few remarks. Meaning that I'm going to correct my report right here. And he goes on to state, as alleged by the grand jury in an indictment, Russian intelligence officers who were part of the Russian military launched a concerted attack on our political system. The indictment alleges that they used sophisticated cyber techniques to hack into computers and networks used by the Clinton campaign, and they stole private information and then released that information through fake online and identities. Stop right there. That last part there wasn't a typo. Let me reread that again. Cyber techniques to hack into computers and networks used by the Clinton campaign. They stole private information and then released that information through fake online and identities and through the organization WikiLeaks. They stole private information and then released that information through fake online and identities? What is fake online? Point is here, my point for stopping there is there's nothing super important there. Mueller fubbed that up. He didn't mean to say fake online. He meant to say something else other than fake online. What it was, I'm not really sure, and wasn't the point of the speech either. I'm just saying that he's not with it. He's not that sharp. Okay, so let's move past this. He said, through fake online and identities and through the organization WikiLeaks, the releases were timed to interfere with our election and to damage a presidential candidate. Of course, he's suggesting that it was to damage Hillary Clinton. All right, so stop there for a second. Everything I said up to now is semi-unimportant to the point. Semi-unimportant. Now comes the important part. And it's not really all that clear. You have to really, really read into this to understand what's going on. He goes on to state, and then, at the same time, as the grand jury alleged in a separate indictment, a private Russian entity engaged in a social media operation where Russian citizens posed as Americans in order to influence an election. These indictments contain allegations, and we're not commenting on the guilt or innocence of any specific defendant. Every defendant is presumed innocent until and unless proven guilty. The indictments allege and the other activities in our report describe efforts to interfere in our political system that needed to be investigated and understood. And he goes on to talk about whatever. So, when you go back to the beginning of the important part. So we talked about one situation where Russian military launched a concerted effort, blah, blah, blah. Okay. Then he stops. It's one indictment. Then he says, Then at the same time, as the grand jury alleged in a separate indictment, a private Russian entity engaged in a social media operation where Russian citizens posed as Americans in order to influence an election. This is critically important here. So, and then he goes on to state, these indictments contain allegations. We are not commenting on the guilt or innocence of any specific defendant. Every defendant is presumed innocent until blah, blah, blah. All right. Why did I go into all that? There's a point why I'm 10 minutes in this video and I went into all that. Most people don't realize before this news broke, and it's not covered by major media, is that this statement was made on March 29th. The day prior, March 28th, a federal judge, the same judge, by the way, now to be fair, this judge is a Trump appointee, but it's the same Trump appointee that a few months ago, the Democrats or the left-wing people were going off that it was a major loss for Trump and his people, the right-wingers, that this judge didn't dismiss the lawsuit. That the judge said this is going to go on, and they were so happy about that, and that made the news. However, what's not well known is that the day prior to Mueller's sudden 9-minute speech, the judge issued a ruling that just recently became unsealed, in which she scorned both Mueller and the current Attorney General, Barr, and threatened to hold them both in criminal contempt of court. Why Barr? Because Barr had read verbatim parts from the so-called Mueller report. It's not called the Mueller report. It's called the Special Investigators, whatever, into election and Russian interference, whatever. It's known as the Mueller report. Barr personally didn't really do anything except for just read verbatim. She's concerned, as the defense brought up, prejudicing the jury, potential jury here. Because they said, show us the evidence that we are involved or affiliated with the Russian government. And Mueller's team, the people, couldn't produce any evidence at all. I think it's also a reason why, in his speech, Mueller makes it clear he's quitting. He's leaving the office. He doesn't want anything to do with this. It became obvious from Congress, the testimony he made in front of the House of Representatives, that he wasn't very involved in the whole report anyway. So, if you guys aren't familiar with it, this Russian citizens pose as Americans or an influence election. These are posts these are random social media posts on Facebook, for example, or Twitter or whatever, that say, hey, there's a demonstration for whatever, Black Lives Matter, whatever it is. It's arguable if they're trying to influence either side or they're just trying to see what the reaction is. The judge also went off about calling them active measures and what kind of term that is and how it wrong describes it. And the judge calls out the Mueller report, and the Mueller team was unable to defend it. And when called out on it, they were unable to prove their point. Now, who cares about all that, really? It really doesn't matter that much. He says, she says, whatever, judge says this, Mueller corrects it. No, this gets a lot better than that. So, recently, Mueller testifies in front of, the House. He didn't want to do it. He did not want to testify in front of the House. So, but he does. So, this very sharp person in the House of Representatives asked him a bunch of various questions. Really long questions at first. I wouldn't say softball questions, but they were long questions, and I asked Mueller questions to see how he would react, and very slick way about going about what he wanted to get. And I'm not even exactly sure that his goal was really to get the answer that he received, or what his exact goal was. But he waited to the very end to ask this really critical question. When he asked the question, Mueller looked at him and he was like, sorry, repeat the question, went back and forth, and then he sums it up. Looking at a news article here, see if there's anything I want to quote directly from it or not. But I've investigated this much further than this news article. I've looked at the actual court transcripts. The Republican member of the panel, which I'm referring to, is Tom McClintock of California. Asked him about his puzzling press conference, pressing him on whether the real reason he called it was to retroactively soften allegations he made in his report to comply with Judge Frederick's demand a day earlier. Upon clarifying his question, and McClintock clarifies it 2-3 times, and basically says, I'm summarizing here. I'm not quoting exactly. I'm summarizing. You can go look at the exact transcript. It's out there. You see the exact transcript of the exchange or the video of it. Either way, it's very much out there on YouTube or whatever. I've watched it a few times. He says, I'm basically asking you if your press conference, I'm summarizing here, if your press conference was called in any way, shape, or form because of the prior day's ruling from the judge threatened to hold you in contempt of court. Was that the reason why? Was there any way, shape, or form related to the reason why you called the press conference? Mueller's response? No. No. Mueller does a press conference a day after a federal judge tells Mueller that him and Barr are basically going to be held in criminal contempt, which is what the defense was asking for. But the judge says, no, I'm going to impose sanctions, is the legal word, against you if you don't comply with my order. I'm going to make it clear that you have no evidence that, blah, blah, these guys are not working as a part of the Russian government, this, that, and the other. And going forward, make no such reference to influence the jury. So he makes this long, unnecessarily long, 9-minute speech. I mean, I'm not an attorney, right? So I'm already 18 minutes into this video, so I'm not making as clear of a point, but I'm being much more clear than he was in his 9-minute bullshit speech. So the whole reason for his 9-minute speech was a sentence. And then, at the same time, as the grand jury alleged in a separate indictment, a private Russian entity engaged in a social media operation where Russian citizens posed Americans in order to influence an election. These indictments contain allegations, and we are not commenting on the guilt or innocence of the specific. Okay, of course he's not going to. The comment of the guilt or innocence. Mueller said in front of the House he was effectively a U.S. attorney. He was appointed as a U.S. attorney in his role So, of course, he's leaning towards guilt. That's obvious. But he's making it clear it's simply an allegation. And he's clear in what he says here. He says, he's specific and clear in what he says. And at the same time, as the grand jury alleged in a separate indictment, extremely misleading there. The grand jury alleges this? Why does the grand jury allege anything? The grand jury alleges something because the DA, or in this case, it's not a DA. A DA would suggest, county or parish prosecutor. In this case, it's a U.S. attorney. They alleged it because the U.S. attorney, in this case, it probably wasn't Mueller. It was probably one of his people in his office. But the Mueller's office, that U.S. attorney, told them to think that. They didn't think this on their own. The U.S. attorney, whatever their title is, it would be assistant U.S. attorney, because they're not the U.S. attorney. Mueller would have been, effectively. Assistant special prosecutor, assistant special counsel, whatever you want to call him. He's effectively, for all intents and purposes, assistant U.S. attorney. They wrote the damn indictment up. They're just convincing the grand jury to buy off on it and give what's called a true bill. The true bill to defendants, meaning, yes, you've been indicted. You've been true billed. So when he says grand jury alleged, it's because the special counsel's office wanted them to allege just that. It wasn't the grand jury's idea. They were misled. It's a one-sided thing, by the way, in a grand jury. It's not a normal jury. You don't get to be cross-examined. The defense doesn't get a choice. It's only the prosecution presenting their side of what's going on. It's very one-sided. All right. The woman I was talking about earlier, who was written for, will be the judge. The female judge. That speech was written for the judge in such a way that the judge can watch the first however many minutes of the speech, and he can pause and he says, okay, now I'm going to go into the two parts of the report as if that's important. It wasn't. The judge say, fine. Then the judge puts out a statement saying, hey, court's satisfied with your statement that you met the court's demands. All right, what other points I want to make here? This example specifically exemplifies the entire Mueller report. But the key is, this is probably one of the first or the first time that the Mueller report has been challenged in a court of law. In this case, a criminal court, a felony court. Not a felony court, but federal court criminal case. A federal criminal felony trial proceeding, part of a felony trial proceeding, the early parts of it. So there's going to be much more that comes out, especially after the Inspector General comes out with their report, and we'll see what happens there. What's more important than that to understand about the Mueller report is that most people that are into this Mueller report don't understand what an indictment looks like, especially a federal indictment. Very specific, usually. I'm charging a person with 2 crimes. Count 1 of the indictment says this person rented a car. They, rented a car on this car sharing application. They used this car to drive to this location. At that location, there was a report of the XYZ, and they sold cards, debit cards, for example, that were used, and I'm making reference to a specific indictment here. It doesn't matter. I'm not going to go into the details of the specific indictment, but I'm making reference to a specific federal indictment that I read many of them, but it goes into enough details. They sold these hundreds of cards, and then they were observed at this ATM. They were on video in these 2-3 verified locations that they did in fact do this, which is a violation of USC, United States Code 18 point blah 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 whatever. Then it stops, and also states, and the indictments almost always state, this indictment does not contain all of the information, but enough information to achieve the goals of indictment, blah, 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 and, whatever. It doesn't go in everything. And they're usually, for a 1 or 2 count indictment, 2 or 3 pages long. So, for a report to contain in excess of 50 pages, 30 pages, which in this case the Mueller report contains 400 plus pages, and it's not even an indictment. And it's clear that in multiple cases he left out exculpatory parts. So he'll put a statement in there saying, I want information. The guy says, I want information in one specific case. He leaves out the part, the guy says, yeah, I want the information as long as you can release it, as long as it's not confidential, I want the information. He leaves out the part where the guy says, as long as it's not confidential, yes, I want the information. Making it sound the guy suggested, I want the information. Very misleading. So, you'll only probably review this video if you're super digging into this specific issue. But needless to say, my beliefs are that the Mueller report is absolute bullshit, and Mueller is a vindictive son of a fucking bitch, and their shit's going to be called out. What probably won't happen is, because the Republicans don't want to come off as vindictive, they probably won't try to prosecute Mueller for lying. But when I just described to you, Mueller committed a felony. Now, here's the point that people have not made on social media. I'm confident this is not the only instance on that day Mueller committed felony perjury. When he claimed he didn't know who was on his team, that they were biased, he doesn't ask what political party they're in. We said he wasn't familiar, with the dossier, all this crap. So much. Full of shit. He didn't want to testify because he knew how poorly he would do. Anyway, if you like this, like the content, it was almost 30 minutes long. I can dig into things in detail. Let me know. Got a lot more to cover. This is just one specific aspect that's really key that the mainstream media is just not covering for whatever reason. This is huge. This goes to Mueller's credibility and him being a wordsmith, playing word games, lawyer games. He's not honest, not transparent, not straightforward. If you have a criminal that you want to indict, your evidence is clear, you make a statement to the press, you're ready for questions because you have a clear case to prosecute criminals, which is not the case with his whole investigation. Anyway, thanks a lot.